then start. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Are we ready? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Owen, and this is actually my third retreat to be involved in as a speaker I think it was 2016. I was the keynote speaker, and then last year I led this same session on writing a lament, and I loved it, and I'm so happy that Rachel asked me to do it again. So last year I recorded. This year I'm live with you, and I just feel like it's really special to get to be a part of the retreat in a more live fashion. So that's why I'm in a minivan. I'm actually in my sister's minivan right now. So ignore the background. But just so you know a little bit about me, first of all, I am a Hope mom. So I have 2 girls, and I lost a baby during pregnancy between my 2 girls. Also, writing lament is really special to me on a couple levels. So first of all, I have a degree in English literature. I was a high school English teacher for several years before I stopped to stay home with my oldest daughter. And then because of Hope Mommies, and also because of some other challenges that we've been through with losing a baby, and also with my second daughter who has some high medical needs. I went back to school, and I am almost finished getting a master's in clinical mental health counseling. So writing is really important to me. I also think that writing is a really important way to process grief. So there have been studies that have been done about processing grief through writing and processing trauma through writing. And it's a cathartic process. And I think also as believers, the act of writing a lament is really important, not only because we can write down and say our grief, but also because with a lament, then it asks us to acknowledge that God is there. And I know sometimes when we go through something really difficult, it's difficult sometimes to connect with God. Sometimes we feel angry at God. Sometimes we feel closer to God. But wherever you are in your spiritual journey right now, wherever you are in your grief journey right now, what I wanted to lead you through today is a process of writing a lament. So there are 4 steps to writing a lament, and I'll explain each of them right now. And then I will go deeper into each one, and I'm going to give you some time to actually write your own lament during this session right now. So there's biblical basis for writing a lament. So the book of Lamentations is a lament. Also, about 1/3 of the Psalms are lament. And for me, when I've gone through things that are very difficult, it's the Psalms that I turn to because I think they're so honest. So I'm going to read to you Psalm 13. And it says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep in the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." So Psalm 13 to me is really important because it's so honest. I love that David starts with a question. So the first step in writing a lament is turning to God. So we turn to God, we acknowledge that he's there, and we're choosing in this moment to let God into our grief. You can see that in verse 1 of Psalm 13 when he says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" I mean, that's pretty honest with God. But I think the most important thing to remember as we cry out to God is that God is strong enough to handle these difficult questions that we have when we're still in the middle of our grief. Step 2, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but it's bring your complaint. You see that in verse 2 of Psalm 13 when he says, "How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" So he's talking specifically about what's happening in his heart. The third step is asking for help. And you see that in verses 3 and 4 when he says, "Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes." And then this is big. He says, "Lest I sleep the sleep of death." So he's talking depression here. He's talking despair in the midst of something really difficult. He says, "Lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken." There's a vulnerability here that I think is really important to the act of a lament, because it's in vulnerability and it's in that brave act of being really open that we can let others in, we can let God in to help change our hearts. The fourth step that we're going to go through is choosing to trust. And this is the part in the psalm where there's a really strange shift. So far in the psalm, he said, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" We talked about lest I sleep the sleep of death. He's talking about despair and depression here. And then there's a shift with verses 5 and 6. He says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." There's a couple of things here. So I have trusted. So that's in the past up to now. Okay. So what that means is he's remembering the steadfast love of God. And it's important to remember what God has done so that we can choose to move forward. And then the second two parts, he's using the future tense. He says, "My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." So it's an act of remembrance, and it's also an act of choosing to trust. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to walk us through each of these 4 steps, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to write your own lament after. So I'll talk step 1. I'll give you a few minutes. You write on your own. And then we'll go through each of these 4, and then we'll close out. So if you've got your pens ready, if you've got your journals ready, pull it out and let's write together. So step 1, again, is where we address God. We turn to God, we talk to him, and it's what's called an introductory cry. So again, this is the point where we're choosing to talk to God about grief. So take, let's say, 3 minutes, and you can borrow the language from the Psalms. He says, "How long, O Lord?" Okay, so if you don't know what to say, you can start there. So I'll be quiet for the next 3 minutes, and I want you to write a few lines, whatever is on your heart, about acknowledging God. So, ready, set, go. take about one more minute and finish up that part about addressing God. All right, let's move on to step 2. If you're not finished, this is something that you can always return to later, any of these steps. So step 2 is where we bring our complaint, or in our specific instance, we're bringing our grief. And this is the part where we're thinking about our pain. So we're putting in, it's really powerful to name things. And that is what we're doing here. David does it in Psalm 13, verse 2, where he says, where he names, I have sorrow in my heart, where he says, my enemy is exalted over me. So the task here is to identify the pain. Where does it hurt? Name the pain and tell God about it. And this is also the part where we can bring our questions. We can bring our frustrations. We can bring our doubts. We can bring our darkest sorrows, and we can lay them at the feet of the Lord, because the Lord is big enough to handle it. So I'm going to give you a little bit longer because I know that this part can be difficult. But as you're writing, I want you to think about, where does it hurt? How does it hurt? And I want you to think about, as you're writing, it's not just about explaining that to a piece of paper, it's about telling God about it. So I'm going to give you about 5, maybe 4 to 5 minutes here to bring your complaint, bring your grief, and lay it at the feet of God right now. take about 1 more minute. And remember, this is the part where we're bringing our grief and laying it at the feet of Jesus. So tell the truth. Tell your story. So the third step again is asking for help. And this is the part where we start to identify some of those shields that we might be holding over our hearts. I think there are shields and defenses that we use that serve us well at some points. We have to have those defenses, those coping mechanisms, those shields in certain social situations, for instance. But it's important to be able to recognize those defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms and shields that we put up so that we can recognize the vulnerability that's behind it. And so here, this is an exercise about being vulnerable and asking for help. David does it in Psalm 13, verses 3-4, when he says, "Consider and answer me, O Lord my God." He says, "Light up my eyes." So he's asking for help. I need hope, lest I sleep the sleep of death. So he's being really vulnerable and talking about suicidal thoughts and depression. And he's asking for help and for hope. And asking for help is a huge part of walking through that grief process and letting people in, letting the Lord in, and being a little bit vulnerable. Some of the shields that we use, I think, when we're in grief, sometimes denial is a shield that we use. I'm fine. I'm okay. This is fine. I'm strong enough. I can do it. But then sometimes we resort to anger, or we end up feeling very, very hopeless. And those things are like walls and we can't see past them. And so the asking for help is a process of starting to see past the hopelessness, the anger, the denial, the I'm fine, those walls that we put up. And so in this part of our lament, a lament is asking us to be brave in vulnerability. We're asking God to see us through the other side of our despair. It's not that grief goes away and we go back to normal. That's not necessarily something that we're aiming for, but what we are aiming for is to start to reach on, start to look for hope as we grieve and as we walk through this painful process of grief. So in step 3, I want you to think about, what do you need right now from the Lord? What do you need for your heart? What do you need for your soul? What questions do you need answered? What peace do you need? So start to identify for that and take a minute, and in this section of your lament, ask the Lord for help. Again, you can borrow the words of David. He says, "Consider and answer me, O Lord my God." So maybe those are some words you want to borrow. All right, I'll give you 3 to 4 minutes to do this. Step 3. All right, take about another minute to finish up step 3, asking for help, being vulnerable. Ask God for what you need. All right, so we're going to move on to step 4. Step 4 is choosing to trust. And I know, because I've been there, I know that there are probably a lot of people in your life that have come and told you really empty things like, just trust it. God has a plan. And people come and say those things and they're very well meaning, but sometimes it hits empty on a heart that's grieving. So when I ask you in this final section to choose to trust, I want you to know that this is not empty. And I know that this can be really, really, really difficult. I want to acknowledge that. So I also want to look at the way that David did it. So there's this huge shift from these really, really hard phrases to what he says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. And again, like I said in the beginning, this choosing to trust, sometimes we don't feel it, but sometimes it's just a choice that we make for the purpose of hope. So trusting in the Lord is the rope that we hold on to. It's the anchor for our souls. It's choosing to trust in God's sovereignty, not that this was a good thing, but choosing to trust in God's sovereignty that he has a plan for eternity and for heaven. And so when we trust that God will do 2 things. I like this concept of the already and the not yet. So the already is what God gives us now. He gives us comfort. He gives us peace. He gives us hope. He gives us love. He gives us joy, even in really, really difficult circumstances and difficult times. And so that's the already. And then the not yet is heaven. And so as we think about grief and we go through the process of grief, it's really important to fix our eyes and to choose to fix our eyes on what God gives in the not yet, which is heaven. So when we choose to trust, it's an act of remembering that this life isn't it. It isn't the end. And there's hope for eternity. There's hope for heaven. And so this last part, I'm going to give you a few minutes and I want you to think about heaven, and I want you to think about how you've maybe trusted the Lord in the past, or what God has done for you in the past, or what you've seen him do in other people's lives in the past. And then I want you to, like David says, he says, I will. Okay, so make a commitment to God about focusing on heaven. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. I realize we're almost out of time. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes and then we'll close out. take just a minute more focusing on choosing to trust in God in heaven. All right, our time is almost up. But I want you to know that this is an exercise that you can do periodically. You can take a minute and journal, and you can go through these 4 steps. It's turn to God, bring your grief, ask for help, choose to trust. And you can go through those 4 steps in your journal anytime you want. You can return to this and keep tweaking it, keep working on it. And if you've written something you're proud of, I'd love to see it. So thank you so much for letting me be part of the Hope Mommies Retreat. I've really enjoyed it.